Welcome back to another study. Today we're going to continue and pick up right back where we left off last time, as Pharaoh and his army were bearing down on Israel in an attempt to recover the slaves that they had lost. Pharaoh had determined that the Israelites were wandering aimlessly in the wilderness and had made a mistake in traveling past any route that would have taken them to Canaan, instead electing to hem themselves in on three sides with wilderness. And therein lies the brilliance of God. Not only did he show his might through the 10 plagues that Israel witnessed him pour out on Egypt prior to their departure, but he was about to destroy their taskmasters in front of their eyes, and he would do so in a manner that would capture humanity's attention for thousands of years. Before we get too far into this study, I'd like to state that this video is in no way meant to attack any individual person or group of people. We will be discussing the views of one specific person at the beginning of this video, and then we'll get into what the Bible says about the event of the Red Sea crossing. But I do want to make it clear before beginning that this is not an attack on that person's character at all. Now, prior to discussing the crossing of the Red Sea, we need to discuss a man named Ron Wyatt. In any examination into the Red Sea crossing, Ron Wyatt has to be discussed. This is because of the age that we live in, the information age. In the age of the internet, any opinion, no matter how inaccurate, can be spread. Ron Wyatt was a nurse in a hospital in Madison, Tennessee. The story goes that at the age of 27, he saw a picture in Life magazine of the Drupanar site, now known to be the probable location of Noah's Ark. This sparked Wyatt's interest and was the beginning of a long career as an amateur archaeologist. Mr. Wyatt eventually made many claims of archaeological discoveries over the last 22 years of his life. He claimed to have found around 92 different relics or sites, some of which include the biblical Ark of the Covenant, the location of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Tower of Babel, what he called the true site of Mount Sinai, the true site of the crucifixion of Jesus, the original stones of the 10 Commandments, Goliath's sword, Noah and his wife's burial location, and what he claimed to be the location of the crossing of the Red Sea in the Gulf of Aqaba in the Red Sea. You can imagine then that if all the claims of Ron Wyatt were true, he would be one of the most celebrated archaeologists in history. And yet none of his findings are accredited or backed up by any of his peers or any other respectable scholars. The perpetuation of his findings have been accomplished only through the internet. For anyone who has searched for proof of the Red Sea crossing in recent history, these images probably look familiar. Mr. Wyatt's interest in the crossing of the Red Sea by the nation of Israel became focused on the site of Nubia in Egypt because it seemed to him to fit some of the descriptions of the biblical and historical accounts of the geography. It was on a trip in 1978 that Mr. Wyatt found what he said were the remains of chariots and chariot wheels at the bottom of the sea, though they were heavily covered with coral. Mr. Wyatt claimed to have retrieved one of the wheels and said that an Egyptian authority declared that it was from the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, but no one knows where that chariot wheel is now located, and Mr. Wyatt never reproduced anything more than photographs. Wyatt claimed that he was using simple recreational scuba equipment when he discovered these wheels at a depth of 200 feet in the Gulf. However, Exodus 14:23 records that the Egyptians took up pursuit, and all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. It was there that the Bible records that the waters closed over them, and God destroyed the army in the midst of the sea. The depth of the Gulf of Aqaba is not 200 feet. The depth of the Gulf of Aqaba measures to over 6,000 feet deep. Ron Wyatt also claimed to have found both human and horse bones at that location, none of which were ever reproduced. But let's try and understand for a moment if finding human or horse remains might even be possible 3,400 years after the event on the seafloor. We can use the wreckage of the Titanic as an example. The Titanic went down in 1912 AD, and 1,553 people were lost in that wreckage. In 1985, 73 years following the sinking of the Titanic, it was discovered and explored. Scientifically designed underwater video equipment was employed, and in addition, more than 53,000 photos were taken. The remains of not one solitary person, neither skin nor bone, was found. Everything had been completely consumed by fish, crustacean, and the destructive effect of salt water after only 73 years. And furthermore, the site of Nubia, where Mr. Wyatt believed the crossing to be, is 250 miles from Ramses, following the route that he chose. Remember in the video, The True Date of Jesus Christ's Birth, we learned that an average person can walk 15 to 25 miles per day. So even at the fastest speed, it would have taken the nation of Israel 10 days to reach that location, had they marched non-stop. But if you recall from my video, The Dates of the 10 Plagues, we learned that the new calendar was given to Moses and Aaron on the 1st of Nisan, the Exodus occurred on the 15th of Nisan, and the crossing of the Red Sea occurred on the 21st of Nisan. We're going to prove that date by the end of this video, but for now, just observe that this timeline only provides Israel 7 days from the Exodus to camp before Migdol, where the Bible states that they crossed the Red Sea. So it would not be possible for Israel to make it to the Gulf of Aqaba in 7 days. It would have taken them much longer because, for one, they weren't all average men. There were men, women, children, and the elderly. They also had livestock that had to be driven as well. And don't forget the sarcophagus of Joseph, which weighed a significant amount, traveled at the front of the ranks. Before moving on, I want to say it again. This video is not meant to slanderize any person or group of people. I'm only interested in the facts, and the fact of the matter is that even the curator of anthropology and archaeology with the Israel Antiquities Authority in Jerusalem did not agree with Ron Wyatt. The following are Josiah's, the curator's words taken from a statement on August 8, 1996. Mr. Wyatt is neither an archaeologist, nor has he ever carried out a legally licensed excavation in Israel or Jerusalem. In order to excavate, one must have at least a bachelor's in archaeology, which he does not possess despite his claims to the contrary. We are aware of his claims which border on the absurd, as they have no scientific basis whatsoever, nor have they ever been published in a professional journal. They fall into the category of trash, which one finds in tabloids, such as the National Enquirer, Sun, etc. It's amazing that anyone would believe them. A link to that statement will be posted in the video description. Now, I only quote Mr. Zayas to emphasize the credibility of Ron Wyatt. We have to ensure that the sources where we get our beliefs are grounded in Scripture, not something we found on the internet. So now let's examine, for those interested, what the Scriptures say about Israel's crossing of the Red Sea. It is common knowledge among Jewish scholars today that the Red Sea parting occurred on the 21st day of Nisan. There are 3 ways to prove this date using the Bible, and we'll be covering the first 2 today. But first, while it isn't proof that Israel crossed the Red Sea on the 21st, it is worth noting that when God commanded Moses to observe the 7-day feast of unleavened bread following the Passover, he commanded a holy assembly to be observed both at the beginning and at the end of that feast. Exodus 12:26 states, "And on the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the 7th day. No work shall be done on them, except what must be eaten by every person. That alone may be prepared for you." The first day, the 15th, would be a remembrance of Israel's exodus when Pharaoh commanded them to leave Egypt. If not the crossing of the Red Sea, what would the holy assembly on the 7th day be for? If we count the days, the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st, the 21st is the 7th and final day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when a second holy assembly was commanded by God. It's not proof, but it's a good start. But the first way to prove the date of the Red Sea crossing, then, is the distances between the campsites listed prior to the Red Sea crossing. As we learned last time, all 41 campsites of Israel in the wilderness, not counting their final campsite at Gilgal in Canaan, are recorded in Numbers 33. In Numbers 33, 3-5 record that the Israelites set out from Ramses in Egypt and traveled to Sukkoth. The journey from Ramses to Sukkoth is about 32 miles. Traveling only 15-ish miles per day, that is about a 2-day journey. So from the night of the 14th, the Israelites came out, they walked all through the 15th, and then they walked all through the 16th, and they arrived at Sukkoth late on the 16th. Then from Sukkoth to Etham, it's about 20 miles. From Sukkoth to Etham, it's a little more than a day's walk. So when did the Israelites arrive at Etham? Because it's a little more than a day's walk, we can safely assume that they arrived at Etham on the 18th day of the first month. And from Etham, Israel traveled to a location called Migdol and camped before Migdol. Migdol was a place located on the northern end of the Red Sea. Exodus 14:2 describes its location as by the sea before Pi-hahiroth and in front of Baal-ziphon. It would have been a flat area of seashore large enough for over 2 million people to camp. It is believed that a location about 47 miles from Etham is the location referred to as before Migdol. That would make it about a 3-day walk. And before Migdol is where Israel crossed the Red Sea. They would have arrived on the 20th day of the first month, and the Egyptian army was chasing after them. God caused an east wind to blow throughout the night in order to part the Red Sea, and they crossed over on the 21st day. On the 20th day of the first month at 6 p.m., that is when, according to the Jewish biblical calendar, it becomes the 21st day. So on the 20th, all through the night, God parted the Red Sea. Now, according to our calendar, it was the night of the 20th, but according to the Jewish calendar, this was the 21st. Throughout the night of the 20th till early morning, the morning of the 21st, is when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. While the Egyptian army chased after the Israelites, God took the pins out of the wheels of all the chariots so that their wheels would fall off, and the walls of water collapsed and covered them and killed them all. And this happened in the morning. Let's read Exodus 14:12. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided. It says all night. Let's also read Exodus 14:24. And it came about at the morning watch that the Lord looked down at the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of Egyptians into confusion. In verse 24 it says, at the morning watch. And then in verse 27 it says, so Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, when the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. When you look at it that way, they started out from Ramses on the 15th. They arrived in Succoth on the 16th. On the 18th they arrived at Etham, and on the 20th they arrived at before Migdol, and on the 21st they crossed the Red Sea. But that's not the best way to explain it, because the Bible doesn't contain these dates. What it does contain, however, is something very interesting about the next campsite. And that leads us into our second proof for the date of the 21st for the Red Sea crossing. Let's read Exodus 15:22 through 24. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And they came to Marah. They could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, what shall we drink? Then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. There he made for them a statute and a regulation, and there he tested them. At Marah he gave them a statute and a regulation, and tested the Israelites. What was the statute and regulation that God gave them? Statutes and regulations generally refer to the law, or the 10 Commandments. The first 4 commandments are known as statutes, and the last 6 are regulations. In Exodus 20, verses 1 through 17, God gave them 10 commandments at Sinai on the 6th day of the 3rd month. Then in Exodus 20, verse 22, all the way through Exodus 23, verse 33, that is when God gave them the other specific laws. But besides this, God gave them a statute and a regulation at Marah before they ever reached Sinai. So again, what is this statute and regulation that God gave them? The 10 Commandments appear not only in Exodus 20, but also in Deuteronomy 5. And when we closely examine the commandments in Deuteronomy 5, we find something different about 2 of those commandments. Deuteronomy 5:12 states, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. There are only 2 commandments here that have this phrase, as the Lord your God commanded you. Here God is saying to observe the Sabbath and keep it holy, but he also adds, as the Lord your God commanded you. Now some might say, Deacon, Deuteronomy is talking about the past, and when they received the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. He's simply reiterating these things in the plains of Moab. That's why he's saying, as the Lord your God commanded you. And some people might say this. However, if that was the case, then why didn't he say this for all 10 commandments? All 10 commandments should have had the phrase added, as the Lord your God commanded you. And not all of them have this. Only the commandment about the Sabbath and the commandment to honor your father and your mother have this phrase, as the Lord your God commanded you. So what does that mean? It means that these 2 commandments were given to the Israelites before God gave them the 10 commandments. That's why he said, just as I have commanded you before, do this. This goes to show us how important it is to keep the Sabbath and to honor our parents, because these 2 commandments were given by God to the Israelites before the 10 commandments were given at Mount Sinai. Also, in Marah, it says that God gave them a statute and a regulation. These 2 words are in a singular form. It was 1 statute and 1 regulation. Now, what day do you think it had to be if the statute was to keep the Sabbath day holy? It only stands to reason that God gave the statute and regulation on the Sabbath day, right? God was saying, today is a Sabbath day. While you were living in Egypt, you did not keep the Sabbath day. Today is the Sabbath. So starting from today, every week, keep the Sabbath. This is what God taught them. If he gave it to them at Marah, then the day when God gave them these 2 commandments should have been on the Sabbath day. If you know these days, then you can know what day of the week it is. And if you know one day of the week, you can figure out what day of the week all the other days fell on, right? Using Exodus 15:2, we figure out the day that they arrived at Marah. We know that they crossed the Red Sea on the 21st, and this verse tells us that they walked for 3 days, and they came to Marah. So 21 plus 3 days is 24. They arrived in Marah on the 24th day of the first month. We also know that this day was the Sabbath day. When we know this, all the calendar dates will fall into place. Even the day of the week is accurate. Taking all of this into account, Israel crossed the Red Sea on the 21st of Nisan, or Wednesday, April 29th, in the year 1446 BC. Come back next time and I'll show you the third way that we can prove that Israel crossed the Red Sea on the 21st of Nisan, by proving that the command to observe the Sabbath was given to Israel at Marah on the Sabbath day using events that happened to them 3 weeks later. Until then, this is Deacon saying thanks for watching, and God bless.